I was born at St. Joseph Hospital in Denver, Colorado. I was raised in the Five Points. Now, when most people talk about where they're from or where they grew up, they would call that a neighborhood. But for me and my community, we called it a hood. You would hear people refer to things like, "Oh man, what hood are you from?" Or, "Did you hear there's a party back in the hood tonight?" And for us, it was just a term of endearment. And for me, it was to show love and support for the community I was from. See, I didn't even know that people could think otherwise about where I was raised. Don't get me wrong. It's not like I didn't know there were things going on in my community. Like, there was gang violence, there was drugs, there was all kind of things going on. But for the most part, for me, it was just home. And the first time I ever realized that there was something different, that it was something different than most people experienced, was at a fundraising event when I was in 8th grade. See, I was a part of a nonprofit, and I was a part of that nonprofit since I was in 3rd grade, and then they asked me when I was an 8th grader to come and talk to a crowd about my experiences in that nonprofit. So they made me the keynote speaker in 8th grade. And so I go to this event, and I share my experience, and once I get done, the crowd erupts, right? There's a standing ovation. People are cheering. I'm feeling great about myself. And as I walk off stage, my mentor comes up and hugs me, and he goes, "Hey, PT, that was a great job. Hey, I just want to let you know that they're about to dismiss everybody for desserts. And so if you look at the table across the room, there's all these desserts that people haven't touched yet. And since you did such a great job, I'm going to let you go get after them first." And that's all he had to say. I make a beeline for the dessert table, and as I'm getting closer, I can see that there's a table full of cheesecake, and I can't wait to get to it. And just as I'm about to get to it, I look up, and I am now swarmed by a group of women who are crying, and there's mascara on their face, and they're hugging me, and they're saying, "You're so brave," and they're saying, "It must be so hard," and I'm getting frustrated and upset, and I'm confused, mostly because now there are people at the cheesecake table. But I'm also upset and confused because I didn't really know what they were talking about. See, for some reason, some lines of communication got crossed, and they thought when I talked about my neighborhood, my hood, that I was talking about something that wasn't good. But that wasn't the case for me. See, I knew that being from my hood, there was just rules you had to follow. And for the most part, if you followed those rules, you were going to be all right. Like, one rule is mind your business. Or as my uncle would say, mind your business. And if it don't involve you, it don't involve you. Another rule was, and this one's like a little tougher, you know, if you've never heard of it, you might need some help figuring this one out. But you might want to be careful of what color you wear depending on what neighborhood you're in. If you're ever confused about that, black is always a good choice. Another rule in the hood that I grew up in is that you never talk directly to the police. That if you needed to tell somebody, an authority about something, you use the anonymous tip line. Because snitches get stitches. And another rule, which is probably my favorite and the most unique out of all of them, is if someone happens to come up to you and say, "Those are a nice pair of shoes. What size are they?" The only acceptable response is, "Yo size, homie." I'm just playing, don't say that. You see, where I grew up, I understood how things worked. So I was never nervous or freaked out because that's just the way the world was for me. And I felt that way about any hood I was in. As long as you knew the rules, you'd probably be okay. There's actually only one hood that has ever freaked me out, that has ever made me nervous, that has ever brought tears to my eyes. And that hood is fatherhood. You see, I knew who my dad was my whole childhood, but I didn't always grow up with him raising me because of a very unjust incarceration system. And so my thoughts around fatherhood and how to be a dad were jumbled and confusing. And so when me and my wife found out we were expecting our first child, I I probably had the feelings that most parents have when they first find out, is like excitement and jubilee and all these things. But quickly after that, the feelings of inadequacy and fear and what am I going to do set in. See, with this new hood, I didn't know the rules. So then I just set out to figure out what they are. So I started asking people around when I was in the barbershop or at, football games and different things like that. I would ask kind of the men around about this hood and like how it operated. But some of the advice I got was just weird. Like, if you want your son, or if you want your child to grow up, if you have a son and you want him to grow up, be big and strong and tough, don't give him kisses. It's like, what? Or, hey, you make sure you name your son after you so everybody knows that that is your seed. That was real advice. That doesn't help, guys. So I kind of pushed that out the way, and I said, okay, there's got to be experts in this realms, right? So let me gather some books on this whole fatherhood thing to figure out, how do I do it? And so I started reading some books on it, and I realized that although some of the stuff was good, it didn't really speak to my cultural context. And so it didn't feel relevant. So then I thought, okay, the real last opportunity, the place where they have to give you the rules on this thing, is at the hospital when my wife goes in for labor. Because there's no way they're going to give you this baby without instructions on how to raise it, right? If you're laughing, you got kids. And so we get to the hospital, and my wife's going into labor, and it seems like everything's going well, and I'm waiting for this opportunity to either ask or receive these instructions about how to do this thing. And as the night goes on, I realize more and more that's probably not going to happen. And I knew it was over when the nurse beckoned me over from the window and handed me my wife's right leg, and I grabbed it, expecting there to be like, some sort of shuffle, and then someone would come relieve me of my leg duty. And no one ever did. And then things got real intense because my wife was pushing, even though the nurse had recommended that she shouldn't push, and I wasn't going to get between that. And so she's pushing, and I am fairly certain that a baby is coming pretty quickly, but there is no doctor to receive it currently. And the nurse is looking very nervous at my wife, the situation, and the door. And shortly after, a doctor rushes in, throws off his coat, and almost in run motion, washes his hand, puts his gloves on. And just as he puts on his gloves and gets over to my wife, he sticks his hand out, and my baby boy is born, and he one-hand catches him. I look at the doc like, you might be in the wrong profession, okay? And then he picks up my son, and he used the little nose sucker thing to, like, open all the, like, breathing, which I didn't know. Like, I thought we just came breathing. I didn't, anyway. And like, turns him over and pats him, and I guess that's when he's supposed to start crying or making sounds, but he's not. And he starts to look concerned, and the nurses start to look concerned. And then he looks at the nurse, and he says, hey, get this baby to ICU right now. He's not breathing well. And so they swaddle him real quick, and they put him in this, like, little glass case thing with 4 wheels on it, and they start to wheel him out. And I look at my wife, and she looks at me like, I can't go with him. And so I run out behind the nurse, and I'm running behind, and now every fear that I could have starts to creep into my mind. And so I just start to pray. I just go, Lord, I don't know what I need to do, but I'll do anything. I'll do anything. If this kid needs my heart, he can have my heart. If he needs my eyes, he can take my eyes. Just whatever he needs, I'll do it so that he's okay. I'll do anything. And it turns out that my son just has a flair for the dramatic. Because we get into the ICU, and they put him in this little, like, breathing chamber thing, and he's breathing fine. He even manages to, like, wink and smile at some of the nurses. And they swallow him up again, and they hand him to me, and I got to hold him first. I still brag about that to my wife to this day. And I'm looking him in his eyes, and it all starts to click. I realize why fatherhood doesn't come with this, like, one-size-fits-all handbook. And it's because fatherhood isn't about rules. This hood actually just starts and ends with love. Thank you.